Welcome to the Bovine Podcast. I'm your host, Bella, and today we're diving into one of the most fascinating chapters in dairy breeding history. We'll be exploring how a single farm in Washington state revolutionized Holstein genetics and created a legacy that continues to shape modern dairy herds worldwide.
And I'm Douglas, joining Bella for this journey back to the early 1900s when Carnation Milk Farms was changing the game for dairy breeding. Today we'll cover the visionary founder E.A. Stuart, the famous contented cow philosophy, record-breaking champions like Segis Pietertje Prospect, and how Carnation's approach to breeding and animal welfare created a blueprint that's still relevant in today's sustainability-focused agricultural landscape.
So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's travel back to a time when cows were truly kings. The year is 1908. Elbridge Amos Stuart, already successful with his Pacific Coast Condensed Milk Company, makes what many would consider a risky move. He purchases 360 acres of farmland in Washington's Snoqualmie Valley, sight unseen. Can you imagine buying a farm without even looking at it first, Douglas?
That takes some serious confidence. But Stuart wasn't just making a random bet. He was acting on a tip from his childhood friend Sam Hill that the railroad would soon connect to the area. Still, it was a bold move considering the challenge he was trying to solve.
And that challenge was pretty straightforward. Stuart simply couldn't get enough milk for his condensed milk business. The supply couldn't keep up with demand, so instead of just looking for more suppliers, he decided to create his own dairy paradise.
By 1910, just 2 years later, he had expanded to 750 acres and established Carnation Stock Farms as a showcase facility. He invested heavily in premium Holstein Friesian cattle and hired the absolute best animal husbandry experts available.
What made Stuart's approach different from other dairy operations at that time?
That's a great question. What really set Stuart apart was his unique combination of scientific rigor and compassion for the animals. While he was meticulously tracking bloodlines and implementing selective breeding programs, he was simultaneously developing what was, for the time, a radical philosophy about animal treatment.
The famous contented cow philosophy, right?
Exactly. Stuart firmly believed that happy, stress-free cows would produce more milk. This wasn't just a hunch. He built his entire operation around this principle, which would become the cornerstone of Carnation's breeding program and brand identity.
It's amazing to think that this operation would eventually grow to 1,400 acres and completely transform dairy breeding practices worldwide.
Let's talk about how the iconic Contented Cows slogan came to be. It's actually a fascinating story that begins in 1906, during a marketing meeting in Chicago.
So this was even before the farm was established?
That's right. Stuart was describing to a marketing firm how his cows were treated, their diet, living conditions, the whole works. As the story goes, someone at the meeting casually remarked, "They must be very contented cows." That simple observation sparked what would become one of the most recognizable agricultural marketing campaigns in history.
Talk about a light bulb moment. But this wasn't just clever marketing, was it?
Not at all. Stuart put real policies in place that were revolutionary for that era. In the main barn's breezeway, he posted a sign with the farm's animal welfare guidelines, and remarkably, that sign still exists today at the farm.
What did the sign say?
It read, "The rule to be observed in this stable at all times, toward the cattle, young and old, is that of patience and kindness. Remember that this is the home of mothers. Treat each cow as a mother should be treated. The giving of milk is a function of motherhood. Rough treatment lessens the flow. That injures me as well as the cow. Always keep these ideas in mind in dealing with my cattle."
That's incredibly progressive for the early 1900s.
It really was. Workers were even prohibited from swearing in the presence of the cows. And this wasn't just about being nice. Stuart understood the practical connection between stress and reduced milk production. something that modern dairy science would later confirm.
And the science backs this up. Modern studies have shown that stress hormones like cortisol can significantly reduce milk letdown in dairy cows. When cows experience stress, their bodies divert resources away from milk production.
Carnation was also innovative in their milking schedule. For their champion cows, they implemented a 6 times daily milking schedule, which hit the sweet spot for optimal production. This was decades ahead of the curve in dairy welfare and management practices.
So they were essentially practicing evidence-based animal welfare before it was even a concept in agriculture. That's pretty remarkable.
Exactly. This philosophy became Carnation's secret sauce, making humane treatment an integral part of genetic improvement, a surprisingly progressive stance for the early 20th century.
Let's dive into how Carnation actually implemented their breeding program. This wasn't just about being nice to cows. There was serious science behind their approach.
Absolutely. Carnation's breeding program was truly a game changer in the dairy world. Stuart focused exclusively on purebred Holstein cattle, investing significant resources in premium breeding stock and top-tier personnel.
What was their main breeding objective?
Their primary goal was to increase milk production through selective breeding. But what made their approach special was how methodical and scientific they were about it. Carnation kept meticulous records of bloodlines, production data, and offspring performance to guide their breeding decisions.
And they didn't stop at just traditional breeding methods. By the 1950s, they had constructed a $1 million research laboratory dedicated to finding ways to make cows more contented and productive. That's equivalent to about $10 million in today's money.
That level of investment in research was almost unheard of in agriculture at that time. Their scientific approach to breeding went hand in hand with their focus on animal care and nutrition.
One thing I find particularly interesting is that Carnation didn't keep their genetic improvements to themselves. They actively worked to spread these superior genetics throughout the industry.
That's right. They crossbred their prize Holstein bulls with the stock of independent dairymen. This created a ripple effect of increased milk production efficiency throughout the industry. It was a form of genetic outreach that benefited the entire dairy sector.
And the results were undeniable. Carnation became America's undisputed champion of prize-winning Holstein cows, consistently raising the bar for milk production and butterfat content. Many of today's Holsteins carry Carnation genetics, a living testament to their century-long pursuit of excellence.
Now let's talk about some of the superstar cows that Carnation's breeding program produced. They bred more prize-winning Holstein cows than any other U.S. breeder, with several achieving legendary status in dairy breeding history.
Who was their most famous cow?
Without a doubt, that would be Segis Pietertje Prospect, pronounced Segis Pietertje Prospect, affectionately known as Possum Sweetheart. She embodied everything Carnation's breeding philosophy aimed for.
What made her so special?
Working with skilled milker Carl Gockerell, who milked her 6 times daily at regular intervals, Segis Pietertje Prospect shattered production records. In 1920, she produced 37,381 pounds of milk in a single year.
That's incredible. How did that compare to the average cow of that era?
The average cow in 1920 produced about 4,000 pounds of milk annually. So Possum Sweetheart was producing nearly 10 times what a typical cow would produce. She was essentially producing her own body weight in milk every 3 weeks.
To put this in perspective for our listeners, that would be like if the average person ran a marathon and then someone else came along and ran 10 marathons in the same amount of time. It was that level of exceptional performance.
Her achievement was so remarkable that newspapers around the world published the story. She even received visits from celebrities, including heavyweight boxing champion Jack Dempsey and French General Marshal Joffre.
And what happened to Possum Sweetheart?
When she passed away in 1925 at the age of 12, both Stuart and her milker Carl Gockerell were deeply affected by the loss. In 1928, they erected a monument in her honor at the entrance to Carnation Farms. believed to be the world's first statue dedicated to an individual Holstein cow. That statue is still there today.
It's amazing to think about how much dairy genetics have advanced since then. While Possum Sweetheart's record was mind-blowing for her time, modern Holsteins have pushed those boundaries even further.
Absolutely. In 2017, a Wisconsin Holstein named Evergreen View My Gold ET set a new national milk production record of 77,480 pounds in 365 days. That's more than double Possum Sweetheart's achievement and triple the 2015 U.S. Holstein average of 24,958 pounds.
Were there other notable record holders from Carnation?
Yes, quite a few actually. Carnation Ormsby Butter King produced 38,607 pounds of milk and 1,402 pounds of fat in 1936, the first 38,000-pound milk record. Then there was Carnation Ormsby Madcap Fane, who produced 41,943 pounds of milk in 1942, the first 20-ton milk record. And Carnation Homestead Daisy Madcap set a record with 36,414 pounds of milk and 1,511 pounds of fat in 1951, the first 1,500-pound fat record.
These achievements really showcase how Carnation was consistently pushing the boundaries of what was possible in dairy production. Carnation's success wasn't just about traditional breeding methods. They invested heavily in research and innovation. By mid-century, they had built a state-of-the-art million-dollar research laboratory in Van Nuys, California, dedicated to advancing dairy science.
That's right, their research went far beyond just breeding, diving into nutrition, welfare, and management practices. One standout innovation was calf manna, a specialized livestock feed developed by nutritionists from Albers Milling, which was a Carnation subsidiary.
Introduced in the early 1930s, calf manna increased animal consumption and productivity. It was initially designed for dairy cows, but eventually benefited all sorts of livestock. This product actually still exists today, though under different ownership.
Elbridge Hadley Stuart, the founder's son and Carnation's president, was committed to keeping the company at the cutting edge of dairy science. He's quoted as saying, "If we somehow stumbled on a hair tonic that worked, Carnation would sell it."
That entrepreneurial spirit led them in some unexpected directions.
It certainly did. Their approach showed a remarkably modern understanding that milk production is a complex interplay of genetics, nutrition, welfare, and management, all requiring scientific study. This holistic view put Carnation miles ahead of many operations that were still stuck in their ways.
It's fascinating how they recognized these connections decades before they became common knowledge in the industry.
Let's talk about how Carnation's influence spread beyond their own farm gates. Their impact on global dairy genetics was truly remarkable.
Their cows became highly sought after worldwide, and many of today's dairy cattle trace their lineage back to Carnation bloodlines. This wasn't by accident. Carnation made a deliberate effort to share their genetic advancements with the broader industry.
One key strategy was crossbreeding their purebred Holstein bulls with independent dairymen's stock. This boosted the productivity of dairy herds far beyond Carnation's own fences, spreading superior genetics throughout the industry.
The results were transformative. Dairy farmers worldwide could now get more milk from fewer cows, which improved food security, reduced labor needs, and decreased the environmental impact per gallon of milk produced.
Looking at Canadian milk production data, which mirrors broader North American trends, we can see a significant jump between the 1920s and 1950s. In the 1920s, Canadian milk production was about 54 million hectoliters. By the 1950s, it had increased to over 70 million hectoliters, a 29.5% increase.
And this period coincides perfectly with when Carnation's Holstein genetics were becoming widely distributed. The upward trend continued in later decades, with production reaching 95 million hectoliters by the 2020s, a 74.8% increase over the 1920s baseline.
When Carnation started their breeding program in the early 1900s, The average cow produced around 1,500 to 1,900 pounds of milk annually. Through selective breeding and improved management, production levels skyrocketed, with Carnation's elite animals producing many times this amount.
This efficiency revolution fundamentally changed the economics of dairy farming, allowing producers to maintain or increase milk supply with smaller herds. Carnation's breeding achievements also influenced Holstein breed standards internationally, helping shape the characteristics of the modern Holstein cow. The story of Carnation Milk Farms can't be fully understood without looking at its role within the larger Carnation company. The farm started as a way to support Stuart's evaporated milk business, addressing the chronic milk shortage plaguing his processing plants.
But it quickly evolved into much more than just a supplier. It became a corporate showpiece, a cutting-edge research center, and a powerful marketing tool that brought the "Contented Cow" slogan to life.
Stuart spared no expense in developing the farm. He acquired top-notch Holstein Friesian cattle and recruited the best animal husbandry experts money could buy. The farm became a living embodiment of the Carnation brand.
Over time, the Carnation Company expanded well beyond evaporated milk. In 1929, they acquired Alber's Milling Company, allowing them to enter the cereals and animal feeds market.
This acquisition expanded their research capabilities to include nutritional studies for various animals. Interestingly, companion animals eventually became a major focus, leading to the development of consumer products, including the Friskies brand.
Many people don't realize that Friskies, now a well-known pet food brand, originated from Carnation's dairy nutrition research. Their first dog food was introduced in 1934, growing directly out of their work with cattle nutrition.
The Carnation Company remained in the Stuart family until 1985, when it was sold to Nestlé for $3 billion. In 2008, the original farm was sold to a nonprofit, and 8 years later, the Stuart family established a new nonprofit called Carnation Farms on the historic site.
Now let's look at how Carnation's pioneering work in the early 20th century connects to modern dairy breeding practices. While the tools have changed dramatically, many core principles remain the same.
In the 1920s, Carnation's breeders were essentially playing a high-stakes game of genetic guesswork. They selected bulls based on pedigree records, milk yield of female relatives, and physical traits like udder conformation.
Fast forward to 2025, and farmers now use genomic predictions to screen embryos for more than 50 traits before implantation. What once took 5 to 7 years, waiting for a bull's daughters to complete lactation, now takes just months, with artificial insemination and embryo transfer accelerating genetic gains by 400%.
Despite these technological advances, the timeless principle remains: measure what matters. Whether you're tracking butterfat in ledger books or analyzing SNP, pronounced SNP markers, successful breeding hinges on robust data.
Modern dairy farming faces some significant challenges. The need to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030 while meeting increasing global demand for dairy products. Interestingly, Carnation's legacy offers some solutions to these modern problems.
Take their contented cow philosophy. Their stress reduction practices now align with genomic research linking cortisol levels to 20% lower milk production. Today's farms use wearable sensors to monitor stress in real time, a high-tech twist on Stuart's original philosophy.
There's also the efficiency aspect. While a cow in 1944 produced about 2,074 kilograms of milk per year, by 2007 that had increased to 9,193 kilograms. Today's Holsteins exceed 12,000 kilograms.
Carnation's focus on efficient production, getting more milk per unit of feed, remains critical for sustainability. Today's dairy sector uses 35% less water and 23% less feed per liter than in 1944.
One challenge we're facing now is the genetic diversity dilemma. The push for hyperproductive Holsteins has narrowed gene pools, increasing the risk of inbreeding. Carnation's strategy of crossbreeding bulls with diverse herds offers a blueprint for reintroducing hardy traits without sacrificing yield.
As climate change intensifies, the industry is actually coming full circle, returning to more pasture-based systems, but with a genomic edge. Studies show pasture-raised cows have 30% lower hoof disease rates, while CRISPR-edited heat-tolerant embryos thrive in warming climates. It's a perfect blend of Carnation's holistic care approach with 21st-century precision technology. Carnation Milk Farms' legacy continues to shape modern dairy breeding and production. Their nearly century-long pursuit of genetic excellence created bloodlines that still run through dairy herds worldwide. Many contemporary Holsteins trace their ancestry to Carnation-bred animals, proving the lasting impact of E.A. Stewart's vision.
As someone in the industry once said, Possum Sweetheart's 1920 output wouldn't make today's top 100, but her genetic legacy does. That's the beauty of what Carnation accomplished. They weren't just focused on records. They were building a foundation for future generations.
Beyond genetics, Carnation's dual focus on scientific breeding and animal welfare established principles that have become mainstream in modern dairy farming. Their contented cow philosophy was decades ahead of its time, anticipating the modern understanding of how animal welfare impacts productivity.
Their methodical approach to genetic improvement, through selection, record keeping, and progeny testing, laid the groundwork for practices that still inform breeding programs today. While contemporary dairy breeding now incorporates genomic selection, analyzing DNA directly rather than waiting for production records, the fundamental goal remains the same: identifying superior genetics for productivity.
And their physical legacy lives on too. Visitors to the original farm in Carnation, Washington can still see the historic barn with its famous kindness sign and the statue honoring Segis Pietertje Prospect. These artifacts preserve the tangible history of an operation that revolutionized dairy breeding while embodying values that continue to resonate with dairy professionals and enthusiasts alike. Today, we've explored how Carnation Milk Farms revolutionized dairy breeding through a unique blend of compassionate animal care and rigorous genetics. From E.A. Stewart's bold vision in 1908 to record-breaking cows like Possum Sweetheart, Carnation set standards that reshaped the industry. Their innovative contented cow philosophy proved humane treatment boosts productivity, a principle validated by modern science.
And their legacy isn't just historical. It's alive in today's Holstein herds, sustainability efforts, and even genomic technologies. Carnation reminds us that progress comes from blending innovation with timeless respect for animals and land.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to the Bullvine podcast for more deep dives into dairy history and modern innovations. Share this episode with fellow breeders or farmers who might appreciate Carnation's inspiring story.
Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep striving for excellence in your herds, and remember, every great farm starts with a vision as bold as E.A. Stewart's.
Take care, everyone.